This is a session that I call How Drupal is Transforming Government, and it comes from lessons that I've sort of picked up working in the government space in DC over the last couple of years as Drupal's been evolving. And I think that it's largely what I would consider to be a non-technical discussion, so if you're looking for, what modules we used and stuff, you might be in the wrong place. But judging by the lack of t-shirts and all that stuff, I'm feeling like a lot of you are thinking you're in the right place, right? So this is the government side of it, right? None of us are wearing suits though. So yeah, and I'm guessing that a lot of you are probably wondering, first of all, kind of what is Drupal and government? What's the connection? Why is it taking off? And I hope that's one of the reasons you're here today, because that's hopefully the answer that I'm trying to give you is, what is the connection between what's so great about Drupal and why is it successful or useful in government? So I guess it's a bad sign that I'm looking around and I know a lot of people at this conference. I don't recognize anybody here. So except for one guy who I talked into coming here in the bathroom a minute ago, and Catherine, who posted on the internet that she was going to come to this session, and I reminded her about that 15 minutes ago. So that's a really bad sign that I don't know all the rest of you. So can you raise your hands if you actually work in government, federal, state, local, public sector? Oh, okay, cool. So that wasn't just a joke earlier. You really do work in government. All right, good. And just out of curiosity, federal level, okay, state, city, local, municipality, okay, international, okay, cool. All right, good. All right, so you guys are here to learn. That's great. Cool. So, Drupal is obviously growing in government, and I think, one of the things that, people are most interested in is why is that happening? And one of the things that we as a community are most interested in and most passionate about is making sure that it continues to happen. So I think there's a couple of trends that we'll be talking about today that sort of hopefully tie those two pieces together. Why would you want to use Drupal if you're in government, and why as a community do we want to embrace what government needs out of this CMS, this framework, this community? What's up here is a sampling of people that are actually using Drupal in government today. It's pretty impressive. Some of these are new. Some of them have been using it pretty extensively. Some of them use it in smaller microsite type situations. Some of them have intranets. Some of them have public communication platforms. Some of them have big websites or series of websites. It's all over the map, and I'll talk about all those different permutations today. So, the requisite why Drupal slide, everybody, wants to see this. The reason I like to flash this up is I'd like to remind people, particularly people who are new to this community, what the real reasons people use Drupal for, and you'd be shocked to find out that, the total cost of ownership or cost is not always the main reason that we hear. In fact, often in government, what we hear more often than not, believe it or not, is just trying to get off of proprietary platforms where people feel trapped. They feel like they can't publish their content. They don't understand how to modify their system. They feel dependent on contractors. That's certainly a trend that's been going on in government a long time. And what they liked about the open source movement was not so much the fact that there wasn't a cost to purchasing the software, but the fact that there was a very low barrier to entry. They could try it themselves. It wasn't something that someone had in a black box somewhere that they brought in from the Beltway every day. They could just go online, they could try it out, they could give it to their security guys and they could start poking at it. They could show it to their boss and do a demo. And then once they've got it up and running, they can do all kinds of very flexible things with it that they couldn't do with proprietary tools. So, contrary to popular belief, more often than not, I have heard people in government and public sector, in fact, all of our clientele, say that the main reasons they use Drupal are for flexibility, for their ability to control it, for the low barriers to entry, and the fact that there's no lock-in to a vendor. And then cost comes up inevitably towards the end, but it's not the argument that most people lead with when making a purchase, or making, it's a bad slip, in making a decision to implement Drupal. So, one of the things that I think has been most interesting for myself, I used to do government work way back in the day. In sort of the mid-90s, I was working early internet days for a big government contractor. And one of the things that I noticed at the time is that there was just not a lot of vision from the government as to what they wanted to use the internet for. And it was very frustrating because I wanted to get out there, and by late '99, you had startups everywhere, and I wanted to get out there. I wanted to be working on the web. I wanted to be working in Silicon Valley, making no money and having paper stock options and doing a .com or something. And really, the government wasn't even looking at the web as a tool to communicate with citizens at the time. And then, we started our company in 2001. We're in DC, and we had a great opportunity. We have a lot of connections to people that work in government space. And we had an opportunity to do government work, even, when that was really picking up. After September 11th, a lot of the money, the economy was having problems, and, people were shrinking their budgets and things like that, but the government was spending. But our firm never wanted to do anything with government because from about 2001 till sort of mid-2000s, maybe around 2006, we just didn't see that the government was doing anything innovative, interesting, fun, exciting. They weren't pushing the curve on the internet. And I think what's interesting now is that if you look at the people that are using Drupal and you look at a lot of these examples, there's actually really innovative stuff coming out of government. And there's been some great case studies here today, some people that I've had a chance to work with in the past, and I've got little snippets of their stories, and if you missed their case studies, maybe you'll see a little bit of it here. But what I see changing in government now and on the web and using Drupal is, one, a focus on usability, and that means actually caring about what the citizens' experience on the website is. Believe it or not, that's a relatively new thing to most government websites. Second thing is actually doing something useful and presenting that data that they have. Government has a wealth of data that we don't often understand what to do with. It's just there, and it's public domain. So that's starting to change, and there's a lot of tools out there we'll talk about that are helping that. The third is what I call platform building, which is, really it's about standardizing on a single framework that you're going to use throughout your agency or your department or whatever, kind of organization you're in, and doing it at a big scale. So we're talking 50, 100, up to 1,500 in some cases websites already that are running off of Drupal platforms. Collaboration, which is actually using that inherent sort of, what they've called for a while Gov 2.0 or Web 2.0 interactive functionality that comes out of the box with Drupal when you have, a single user profile that connect to another user profile, and they can actually network and have a relationship online. Reuse, which to me is one of the best reasons why government should be looking at open source. There's very little that differs, particularly when you have federal regulations, between the way one organization has to do something on the web and another. In fact, there's a lot of best practices that get codified in a module or something like that, and if we're not sharing those things, if we're just rebuilding them, putting procurements out to buy these things over and over and over again, there's just so much money being wasted just building the same solution over and over again. And open source can really help with that. And then the last is engagement, direct citizen engagement, true open government that's just starting to emerge now. So, first example I have is the FCC site, fcc.gov. They launched last year on Drupal, and the project was actually headed up by Steve Van Runkel, who is now the CIO of the U.S., took over for Vivek Kundra. And I think that's actually a really cool thing for Drupal. Think about the fact that basically the guy who's now the federal CIO for the whole country is his last gig was putting a really nice Drupal site up. I'm sure he did more than that, but that was one of the things he did. So one of the things that I like about this site again is the Federal Communications Commission is a relatively obscure regulatory agency for the average person. Not everyone understands what their mission is or what they do. And this is their website as it looked, about a year ago before they went to Drupal. And I mean, really, honestly, this is what I was talking about. There's absolutely no focus or sense of what the user experience side of this is. There was really no attention paid to that. It's literally just, we have this information, we're required to put it out there, just stuff it out there as hyperlinks. And without that kind of focus, you're barely ever really scratching the surface of making a connection to the citizen. So, just links to people who, do things there. And And this is an example of how they're trying to humanize that experience now. They've got faces to names. They've got the ability to contact these people in a true sort of transparent, open government way. One of the things that I really like is they've got better search mechanisms to identify the documents that they have. So you can do filtering, you can look at, date ranges and topics and categories. And they do all that with taxonomy in Drupal because they've tagged all this content in their migration effort. They're actually able to now use taxonomy to do filtering and things like that. And that's really useful, especially for people that have to come here, attorneys and people that are using this site every day. So the takeaways from an experience like this, while it's relatively obvious to someone who's in maybe a commercial setting where you're out looking, trying to get customers and sell your product or whatever, in the public sector, just the focus on UI is a really important thing because citizens don't have a good sense of what you do as an agency, and so that's kind of important. And you really have to sell your product, just like a storefront would with any commercial product. You have to be able to explain what you do for people and how they can get stuff from you. How do they find that information on your site? And I think FCC does a great job of that. So that's a usability example. A visualization example, this is the energy.gov site, Department of Energy's flagship site that launched a little over a year ago, also on Drupal. This site actually was featured in a case study earlier. Cami Croft, who was the project head here, is she here? Is Cami here? Is she in the room? Okay, so I can say anything I want, right? Okay, so no, just kidding. No, so I'm not going to try to cover all the things that she did in hers, but what I found particularly interesting about this site was visualization. So Department of Energy had all this information, and I think they just did a magnificent job of actually, so the challenge was really not having the information. Did a magnificent job of actually transferring from that model I was talking about earlier of look at just dumping these data files out here that no one can really do anything with. And then actually transforming that now into usable, visualized information. The technology that's being used here is Mapbox, which was developed by Development Seed, who's hanging out at our booth. If you guys want to see these maps in action, they're right out here. It's really fantastic stuff because basically what you're doing is you're taking that data and you're now putting it out there as something useful to the citizen. You're actually giving them a context through which they can determine whether the information that's coming from the agency has value to them. So this is a great example. This is alternative fuel stations mapped throughout the US. So it's just data points mapped on an open source map using Mapbox, and then an overlaid data set there that you can drill into or look at. They did a great job with search. I think one of the things that's really important here too is you just couldn't find stuff. And again, they're sort of taking that data and they're actually educating and engaging you, explaining what you can do with the information that the agency has and makes available. Again, more visualization. So I like these sort of histograms, sort of things that they tell you from a taxonomy perspective what kind of content is on the site and how much of it is there. Things like that make it a little bit more engaging, a little more interesting. Again, here's some map examples I think that are really cool. So using the same mapping set, again about reuse, using the same mapping set, different data sets and different tiles. You just have basically a different style to the data, and you're presenting, in this case, workforce training programs across the country for smart grid technology. So, if you're trying to figure out, in how to find a job in this economic recovery, and you're looking to do something in smart grid, here's the Department of Energy providing you useful information on how you can go do that. Another example would be, again, beautiful, totally different rendering. It's using a very different tile in the background, but essentially it's the same map set being reused on Drupal with a different mapping. This overlay here is for energy consumption per person per state. So you can look at your state, you can figure out what your energy consumption is. Imagine what people are thinking there, but so these are sort of the things that I think make this site a little bit more interesting. It actually educates and tells a story with the information that they have. They take their data and they do something with it so that you as the citizen understand, A, what they do for you, B, what they have to offer you, and C, provide you a service that you can, find an alternative fuel station, find a job in green technology or something like that. So it's actually a resource, and that's a relatively new thing on the web for government sites. And I think Drupal as a platform is really helping to enable that, and it's pretty cool. So that's the Department of Energy and Visualization. I want to talk a little bit about platforms. So, one of the things that's great about Drupal is you can actually roll Drupal out in a variety of ways, from a multi-site, a virtual site. You can have all kinds of configurations in which you're sharing modules, or you're using installation profiles to deploy maybe an army of sites that go out and do a variety of different missions. So we were engaged in a project at the House of Representatives to do this, and it's a pretty interesting way to think about challenges that you have at building websites is in an IT group. So they have a website for every congressman and every committee, and that totals somewhere in the 600s. And what the policy was before was basically, every individual congressman, some of whom just got elected yesterday, can just go out and commission someone to build a website for them, right? And so you get this hodgepodge of any website you can possibly imagine. Stuff built by the kid in his garage in his hometown because his dad was the campaign director, all the way to pretty big companies that do this for a living, and branding and things like that. And the quality varied, the maintenance of it was a nightmare, and they had some pretty high-profile security hacks. So they decided they were going to roll out a standard platform, and they selected Drupal based on its flexibility and its ability to do what I would call platforms. So take a single template and roll out potentially dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of sites relatively easily that all adhere to the same template, so that they can be managed in the same way, with the same kind of maintenance, scalability, security applied to all of the whole fleet of sites. So basically what we did here is, and again, talking about the old way, the most important thing about all of that is, you think about how wasteful, again, it is to build all these sites over and over again, and all the time that went into trying to reinvent, how do I get the Twitter feed for my congressman on the homepage? How do I get the calendar with the bill, the number of votes that are coming up and when the votes are happening? How do I post all these issues and press releases and stuff like that? Well, we cracked that problem once, and then we replicated it out as a platform. So what ended up happening is the sites actually got built. The client actually built about 100 sites with very little Drupal training at all in 2 weeks, because they had a platform that they could build. And each of them ended up looking different, being configured differently, and delivered to an individual office with slightly different content. And they did all of that in 2 weeks in their internal team, because literally the code changes and the deployment of these sites was minutes. It took no time at all. All the time was spent really just configuring the theme and the modules. So an example would be also, so these are examples of sort of the old websites that were all different. They're all hard to manage. Some of them are just straight HTML. And the new ones, which have better standardization, better efficiency, they're certainly more secure, and they can essentially extend this platform as a whole. So if they decide now that they want to add a new feature, something like a new social media thing, or a new bill search or something like that, they can actually deploy that module now across the whole platform with one deployment, and it can be enabled on any site that wants to accept that feature change. And that kind of, I guess, scalability and extensibility, if you will, to the sites is very powerful, because essentially before, if they're each hand-rolled and individually built, there's really no way to get a change that permeates out to the entire fleet. So that's what platforms are about, and you can imagine in government, there's numerous examples where this can be really helpful. Some of the federal agencies out there today, some that are starting to use Drupal and some that don't, have upwards of 500, 600 websites. I believe NASA, who is looking at Drupal right now, has about 1,500 websites that they want to standardize. And just think about, sort of the cost to the citizen of maintaining and building all these disparate sites on different technologies versus that standardization. So that's what platform building is all about. In terms of collaboration, Drupal's fantastic at collaboration, and we often tend to focus a lot on using Drupal as a CMS to power a website. And one of the most prominent websites that we all hear about in government is the White House site, right? Which converted to Drupal October 2009. Well, a lot of people don't know, but they also have an intranet. And the intranet situation for the administration was horrible, because basically what they've had is this sort of homegrown intranet that had been done in basic HTML pages strung together as a side job for somebody at one point, and it was just carried on for years and years and years. And it really was like, a bunch of links on like how to figure out what lunch they're having in the cafeteria, and how to get your forms for security clearance and stuff like that. But there was no search, and there was no collaborative element, there was no tagging, there was no nodes, there was no like views in Drupal. All this stuff and there's no asset management for all these documents. It's just individual web pages floating around out there with no way to find anything. So, if you think about what Drupal is really good at, it's good at organizing information, and it's good about organizing people, individual objects like people, nodes, documents, and pulling these things together through taxonomy. So what the team did is they basically designed an intranet that mirrored some of the technology from the public website and the design, and they went through and they reorganized and retagged and migrated all their content and got it all organized, both organizationally, so they could go drill hierarchically. I apologize, there's a lot of lorem ipsum up there for protecting this is not a public facing site. But basically for hierarchically finding the information, as well as doing searches for information. And so this is basically a really powerful asset now to them, whereas before it was kind of a joke. And so I think Drupal, again, shined in this situation from an organizational perspective. Look at things like common processes. So if you have an intranet and you're thinking about the way that someone uses an intranet, think about using taxonomy in Drupal to be able to daisy chain together a variety of different assets, forms, nodes, whatever, into a process, like an onboarding process. How do you say, okay, click on this thing and I will walk through all the steps of a process and let the CMS serve all that content up to the user? So that's the kind of stuff that they're doing here. Obviously, forms are a big part of it. Again, searchable PDFs with Solar. So Solar technology will actually let you make all the information inside of those PDFs searchable as well. And then being able to actually flag or sort of paste up a favorite link, something you're going to use every day. So, computer services, you're the worst user in the world and you always delete your account. So, you're going to need to go talk to them a lot, whatever it is. So, again, this is Drupal being used as a framework, not as a CMS. And as someone who has a company who's done a lot of Drupal in the last 5 years, I can tell you that Drupal will impress you in some cases more when you go to use it as a custom framework for something like this than it will as a public-facing website. It's really powerful at that, and people tend to overlook that. It's something that's a little bit unfortunate about the community right now. So that's collaboration in one example. And the last one I want to give you again, and not to steal the thunder of anyone else, Tom Cochran from the White House spoke earlier about this in detail, and I don't want to, again, steal his presentation, but I think it's a really, really powerful example of Drupal in government, and I think it's something that everybody who is looking at Drupal needs to understand. It's basically what we call like a petition tool. So the president of the administration invited every citizen to be able to create a petition online. And this is true open government. So you hear about open government being done in a variety of forms, and I think there's some great examples out there. I've talked about a few already, but true open government here, basically saying, hey, come to this website that has been running on Drupal now for 2 years, and now I want you to create a login, whoever you are, however many of you there are, create a login and submit a petition that goes to the top people in the West Wing and tell them what you care about, what you're interested in, or what you want them to act on. It's a pretty bold move. And it's not the kind of thing you would do if you didn't trust your CMS. So, yeah, what could possibly go wrong, right? I mean, can't imagine. So you know, it's called We the People. It launched this summer, and if you haven't looked at it, I'd highly recommend you look at it. And also, if you didn't go to Tom's session, maybe look at the slides from that, because I'm sure he knows a lot more about the details of the strategy and all that. But essentially, it's got a very sort of flexible interface on top of it that allows you to, in a very cool way, kind of work quickly amongst all these petitions. You can do signatures, you can do social media sharing, and obviously you can draft one as well. And so you just create an account with the White House. So this is an example of you know, just a single petition and its signatures. Not surprisingly, day one, you know, who comes out, but, you know, it's PETA and the marijuana lobby are like waiting at the door, and they've, you know, just flood it with like 20,000 submissions immediately. But so this is a great example, again, of both Drupal being used as a CMS, and I think Drupal also being used as a individual collaboration, or in this case, citizen engagement tool. And the numbers on this thing, the number of people that actually used it, really testament to why you would want to do something like this if you were, you know, the administration. It really puts your open government policy out there. You really put it where put your money where your mouth is when you do something like this. And it's really cool that Drupal was able to do this for them. So it was high traffic, again, engagement tools, a focus and a concern for security, accessibility, and scale all at the same time, while being open and receptive to the individual citizen. Very difficult thing to do, very big challenge for Drupal, and I think it did a great job with it. So, so that was my last example, it was my second last example. My last example is about reuse, and I mentioned this earlier from really not so much from a technology perspective, but from an economic perspective. I mean, think about all the time that goes into building all these different tools that are essentially the same everywhere. I mean, if you have to comply with the Freedom of Information Act for how a request is submitted on your website, and that comes straight out of a regulation, and you're applying 20 other security and legal regulations and social media policy guidances and all that to the way that you're doing it, I mean, how different is the other agency's requirement going to be for that same thing? Or more importantly, how different should it be? Did they just interpret it differently or implement it wrong? Because if you're all stuck in that same little tiny box on how far you can move, you'd think once it's done right and it's done well, you ought to be able to share that with everyone else. I mean, basically it's citizens' money, right? You shouldn't be out, you know, procuring these things individually and reinterpreting these regulations every single time, as well as hiring IT contractors, giving them your own specs because you know better than the other guy, and then going through the testing and making sure it works and all that stuff. The reuse aspects of open source are really the key to what's going to be the most successful thing in government. And if you think about it, like this is a great example. I love to use Department of Education because they do some of the coolest Drupal stuff. If you haven't seen some of their stuff, they've used it for everything. They use it internally, externally. They use it for data sites like data.ed.gov. They use it for a variety of different things, and they've gotten really a lot of reuse out of this. And this is a cool example. So they're using Open Atrium as their intranet. And in this case, they built an ideation app. And this ideation app is basically a way for them to poll their individual citizen or their individual employees about things they want to change in the agency. We took that app and we actually put it in, we contributed it, and we actually put it into our open public distribution for government, and we're able to then take that, and anyone that downloads that distribution can install that functionality and use the same functionality like a module, but it's there and installed and enabled immediately when you download the distribution. So we've actually seen it used both on a public site and an intranet site, the same functionality, and I just have a lot of examples like that, like in the municipal level. Think about like 311 applications and citizen information things. Think about the FOIA example I gave earlier. There's all these little niche things that happen with government that if we can just get them into apps, get them into modules, get them into features, I don't care what aspect of Drupal technology you're using, let's get them out into public domain in the open source community and let everyone else draft off of that same functionality. It's the place where I imagine the module system of Drupal being the most powerful and useful thing. So That's kind of what they did there with innovation. The point I really have was more about reuse and innovation, but they're both exciting, of course. So that's my examples: usability, visualization, platform building, collaboration, engagement, and reuse. And those are the things I think we as a community are doing right with Drupal in government, and I think government is using Drupal for the right purposes when they're getting these things done. So those are the examples I have. I'll also say that one of the things that's really neat is when you build this kind of toolkit, this open source toolkit, it gets better every time. And I was talking about this morning. I don't know that in the proprietary software model that anything like this exists. That every time a website is built on FatWire or Vignette or something like that, every time does the next one benefit from that? Can it really actually draft off of the hard work and the thought and the innovation and the improvement that was done? It's not possible, right? So what we have in this case is every single time we've launched as a community a new gov site in the federal space, it's drafted off the work that's been done from the prior ones. And one of the efforts my company's led is called Open Public, which is a distribution around this kind of sharing. But even if you don't use that, there's modules out there that are being built from these things. The White House has contributed modules. Things like the federal IT dashboard have been contributed. There's all kinds of really neat, sort of innovative stuff being contributed. And I encourage you, from a government perspective, to use that as a resource to figure out what other people have done successfully and draft off of that. So that collective experience is what makes open source really cool. So that's it, and I guess I have some time left, so I'm happy to take questions if people have them. Questions? I guess they did want, if you do have a question, maybe use the mic because it's being recorded, so you do want to get that on tape as well. One brave soul, two brave souls.
All right, hey Jeff, Jason Hibbets with opensource.com. I saw a lot of hands raised here, federal, state, local government, and you kind of alluded earlier that NASA was looking at Drupal.
Yeah.
What can these folks take away is like if they want their agency or organization to start using Drupal, what are the keys for them to go to their IT department or go to whoever they need to go to start the process and catch on to this draft that's happening with Drupal?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the so every year at DrupalCon we've had typically a BOF, one or two BOFs on this topic, and it's people who are starting to look at Drupal and need to sell their boss on it, or their boss's boss, or make a business case for it, and they typically look for what are the resources and what are the places to start. That's gotten better progressively in situation. That's actually one of the reasons why I do this talk. Is it's gotten better because precedent is very powerful in government. When you can say to your security guys, well, FEMA is using it and the White House is using it and all this, then there's sort of this idea that other agencies have felt comfortable with it is very encouraging in that sell. But I think that one of the best things you can do is prepare a list of government organizations, kind of like I did here, but maybe hit it from, these are other people that are in the same mission or like agencies or things like that. Take that, figure out what they've actually done well, and then go explain that in that way. Say, this is what the department of such and such was able to use Drupal for, and actually reach out and talk to that person. So there are groups. There's a government group, Drupal for Gov in DC is a group of individuals who are in the government federal space who all get together regularly and talk about ways in which they've implemented Drupal and ways that they're trying to convincing their boss and others in government to use it. So,
thanks very much. Great presentation. I wondered a little bit more about the House of Representatives example, and if you could talk a little bit more specifically about how you deliver that tool set to them, and in terms of themes, they all look very different.
Yeah.
And installation, is that one? Is that multiple? Just a little bit more the details on that. Sure.
Yeah, and the tricky thing about the platform question is Drupal is so flexible in this regard that we've done all permutations of platforms. I mean, there are examples out there where you literally have virtual sites with using the domain access module, where the sites are the same instance of Drupal, same modules. You can run up to, I've heard 1,500, I've heard people running 1,500 virtual sites off the same instance of Drupal. That's actually not the way we chose to go here at the House of Representatives. We chose to use almost the opposite side of it, which is a straight up installation profile. So we took an early version of what ended up becoming Open Public, and we made essentially not really a distribution, I call it an installation profile that sets up all the modules, the views, and all those things. It comes with templates. They can add templates to it. It downloads the right modules, and it has those modules installed, and then you just do a little bit of configuration. You pick the theme, and then you can do some CSS modification on top of that. So they actually have an in-house design front-end team that was capable of doing CSS level changes, so they do those for kind of logos, colors, fonts, stuff like that. And that, between the different themes, the different layouts, and the different CSS, you were able to create enough permutation that 100 websites with people's individual interests could vary wildly in the way they look. And really, if you looked at it from a code perspective, they're identical.
Two quick questions. First, about the House of Representatives. Are those all built off the same installation of Drupal? So like if you're going from Drupal 7.2 to 7.3, are you updating it 600 times, or are you just updating it once and it spreads out to
Right.
everything? And then my second question, on the energy side, I saw how all that data was turned into the great looking graphs and maps and things like that. Was that done with a Drupal module, or was that done with a separate program?
Yeah, so I actually, unfortunately, can't speak specifically to the technology. Ironically, so my company merged with Treehouse Agency, and Treehouse Agency actually did that work. So that people now in my company might know the answers. I'm not one of them. But the technology is Mapbox, which is open source. And again, those guys are actually here. Eric Gunderson and Jeff McCollis of Development Seed created that, and they're right out here at the booth, and you can talk to them about the way that works. I don't actually know the integration there. But your question about the module updates for the distribution or the installation profile, you can do shared modules, so you do like a multi-site configuration, and you actually have modules that are hosted centrally. So you can do updates to those modules, security patches and things like that, and have them apply out to all the sites. But when you want to do core updates to the sites, then I believe you do have to go out and do them individually. And for that purpose, part of our platform work that's been continuing is adding like automation tools like Jenkins, and deployment tools and things that can script out a lot of the updates. So that's about as deep as I could possibly go without exposing my lack of technical knowledge on the subject.
I like what I see with the government websites, but I represent a membership association, and I
Yeah.
wonder if I'm alone in the world in the conference. Is there any membership associations related, or have you worked with this or done something similar with associations?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a few associations that use Drupal. I don't have a comprehensive list. I don't track it as closely, but we are in DC, so we've done a lot ourselves. Another company here that's in DC, Forum One over here, they also do a lot of a little bit larger kind of public policy type organizations, but nonprofits, and a lot of them tend to be membership organizations. They're a great fit for Drupal. Again, I mean, you get a lot of the same benefits that you'd see in the public sector. I think one of the things that is often difficult about membership organizations is the web requirements are all about the AMS, the Association Management System, or whatever your CRM component is for membership. And those companies have gotten so heavily into what they do on the web that they give you the CMS for free. So when we run into it, we always see Vectra or somebody like that already has some aspect of the CMS. But I do know that Drupal is often used in conjunction with those CRM tools. So that's about all I know.
Hi, I'm from New York City government, and these sites are great for inspiration, but we found, in particular with the IT dashboard that you mentioned, it's very difficult sometimes porting this for a state or local government because it's been engineered specifically for the federal government and some of their back-end systems, the data that feeds it. And after trying to build it and failing and then doing a study on it, we've found that it's just frankly cheaper to leave the open source code there that was created and just build it from scratch rather than rip it apart and trying to create it for our purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a common problem in all aspects of government, but yeah, and I know NYC is undergoing a lot with the reInvent NYC campaign, and there's a bunch of procurements and stuff out there. The problem I've heard more often than not is that it's that legacy technology that ties into the back end, and it just doesn't necessarily integrate nicely. But I think, I guess, I don't know if there's a question in there, or if
Just a statement. Just, in fact, our issue is not our back-end system, but the fact in that case it was tied to federal OMB, and it
Yeah.
was so deeply rooted within the code that it didn't make sense to spend a lot of money ripping that out.
Yep.
So it's open source, so you can look at the code, but I think the conventional wisdom now is no one else can really use it.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Hello, my name's Antoine Green. I actually work with the Federal Communications Commission.
Oh, cool.
And it was amazing that you did mention Energy.gov's use of Mapbox. We are also using Mapbox.
Yes, you are.
And as of yesterday, we have released our Drupal module on
cool.
Drupal.org for the use of Mapbox.
Right.
So just wanted to put that out there, so I know some people had some questions about that.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually gentleman down here had that question. That's actually, so there's a blog post about it. The company's called Seaborn Consulting, and they released an app, a module that does integration with Mapbox. So, yeah.
Hi. I saw a great intranet example. Have you seen much demand for taking it to the next step into integrated project management or integrated document management from government?
Yeah, so this is really hot right now, and a lot of people are looking for the document management solution out of Drupal, and to be honest, it can be a little bit of a weakness of Drupal relative to other sort of so-called ECMs, like enterprise content management tools. So a big trend has been people are looking at Alfresco and Drupal integration, which has been promised and done on some level for a long time, but now seems hotter than ever, and I can only assume that a lot of that has to do with records management requirements. Alfresco passed the DoD's pretty stringent records management compliance or whatever, and that makes it a candidate. The problem I see with Drupal and asset management in general is it's also not historically been very good at workflow, and now there's some better tools in Drupal 7 like Workbench. That we use a lot for kind of routing things, which tends to be a bigger deal in government. But I have not seen integration between that and Alfresco, and I don't know if that's underway, if anyone's working on that, but that might be an area to explore. It's certainly a key part of what you need to do when you're putting documents up online.
Thank you.
So, all right, well, I guess those are the only questions, so do we have one more?
Last one. Have you found Drupal to be more helpful or not helpful in terms of 508 compliance?
Yeah, so we've done an enormous amount with 508 compliance in Drupal on some of the projects we've worked on. I mean, out of the box, I think it's great. I don't think it solves all the answers. I mean, a lot of the problem with 508 is there's basically three places where it can break down. The code itself, which could include modules, so those have to be looked at and evaluated to make sure that they're not, putting up things like pop-ups or things that can be a problem. Second thing would be the theme layer. Even if you have, perfectly compliant 508 or accessible code, you could wreck it with your theme layer if you had bad theme code. So that, unfortunately, is going to be unique probably to virtually every site. So you're always going to have to go through and do an individual review of all that. And so those are the places where it tends to break down. But then the third problem you have is, it depends on the content too, right? So people put in content that has its own markup converted from another site, or they put in, non-captioned audio, video assets, multimedia assets, stuff like that. You can't necessarily control that. So there's really 3 components to look at, and frankly, we have actually contributed a lot of stuff lately on 508 and into the community through Open Public, and a lot of that has to do with the theme layer, like I said. But really, you're never going to get out of, I think, doing individual reviews of how compliant you actually are. And frankly, the 508 guidelines are a relatively low bar anyway. I mean, really, you need to be looking at something a little bit higher than that and look at true accessibility. So, cool. Well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate your attendance.